Okay, it's going.
Hi, it's good to be here, and I guess I want to give you my story of the Holocaust and what I did, didn't do, and so forth. I was born in Czechoslovakia, or now it's Czech Republic and Slovakia, and the reason they split because two people wanted to be president, and um, instead of both of them running against each other, they just split the country in half. Czech Republic today is more aggressive and better place. In other words, larger. It's more business. And the Slovakia, I guess is the proper word, is mostly farmland and so forth and so on. I was born in 1935 in Czechoslovakia, and at age 6, the Germans came into our country, Czechoslovakia, and took it over in 2, 3 days. That's how weak the Czech army was. Before all that, my grandfather was in the military, the Czech military, and 2 days before my 6th birthday, he came home, put out his rifle, and he told us that he was kicked out of the army, as all Jewish people were, and they took their rifles and they came home, and they warned us that the Germans would come to us soon, within 3, 4 days, and take all the Jewish people away. So my mother got to work right away and packed all of our duffel bags, and that's all you could take was one duffel bag. And we were getting ready to leave. And then the thought came to her that she would quarantine her house, have a doctor come and do that. So they put up these signs, and a Red Cross sign that says this house is quarantined. And obviously she got a not Jewish doctor who came out and did this. My grandparents were quite wealthy, and they gave money to all these organizations. So when we asked the doctor to do something, obviously he would do such a thing because we've been good friends, and we gave him dollars to support, or we had a kid that wanted to go to college who was going to be a doctor. We would help him out, so forth and so on. So that was the beginning of the war for us. I went to school for 2 days in 1941 as I turned 6. And after 2 days of being in school, my father came home from the military, and that's when the stuff hit the fan. And at that time, my mother decided that I should be sick, as I mentioned, and stay in bed. And they put us, there's something that throws out hot heat, because I was sick. I don't even know what I had. I wasn't sick, but my mother said, "You're sick." So obviously I listened and got in bed and had the steam blowing up next to me. And I had no clue what kind of illness I was, but I was sick. At least my mother told me. And when the people came to our window about a day or so later, uh, they came to the door, two German soldiers, and they would pick us up, and we couldn't get our bags, and they'd take us away. And my mother, of course, came to the door, and she said, "Listen, I have a child here. My son is very sick, and it's contagious, as you can see from the sign. And we're afraid to come because we don't want to contaminate you guys and everybody else." And of course, the Germans didn't like that, so the first suggestion was that she stay there with her son, and they would take her husband and my sister. And of course, my mother said, "There's no way I'm going to leave my child here. Uh, if they go, or we all go, or none of us go. So you have to make a decision what you guys want." Of course, the two German soldiers walked away. They started talking to each other in German, which I didn't understand. My parents might have, I don't know. And they came back and said, "Look, we'll just take or leave one of us here and watch so that you don't escape or leave. And the other one I'll leave, and this kid will stay here, the other soldier." And of course, that's what happened. Thank God my mother is strong and was able to convince them that it's contagious. So one German stayed there and the other one left. And that night, I don't know how or what, but my grandfather came in from Rabowitz, which is a small um, agricultural farm. My grandfather owned that and ran it with 6, 7 hands that worked with him on the farm. And in those days, you lived on the farm where you worked, and you had a bungalow with your family. The kids would go to school, and these people would work for whoever owns that land. And they had their own food, their own kitchen, and so forth and so on. But they didn't travel. The kids went to school as if as if they were at home, this was their home. And they lived on the property of the person who owned the camp. So the reason we went there, because we felt safer on us property in the camps, in the farm, is because we felt safer, as I said. And the reason being is that the people who own these large businesses, farms, whatever, they wanted to bring over a German individual who runs a camp or runs a farm or whatever, and you had to wait till they brought that German over to run this stuff so that the local population would not be inconvenienced, not be disturbed that we're doing bad things, so they would bring all of their German, I guess you call them farmers or drugstore people, so that they could continue as for the rest of the public, not Jewish, that they could run their lives without being interrupted. And that was the purpose of this. So we stayed there for a month or two longer because they needed to find the right person to come and run the camp and so forth. Not the camp, but the farm. And we had there 2-3 months. My mother got a job with a Czech government official to be their maid and also to cook for them. I don't know if they knew she was Jewish, but they didn't ask. Because if you ask, you can get in trouble. So I think they knew she was Jewish, but they never asked, so she stayed there during the war. My father we lost because we ran away to Hungary before all this started, and then we came back, and that's on the way back we lost my dad, of blessed memory. And my sister and I also came back, and of course we stayed. My sister, my mother, arranged to put her in a convent, and she grew up as a Catholic girl. She was there almost 3.5, 4 years, and of course she didn't recognize her mother after the war when we went together, my mother and I. And that was the sad part, watching a woman, or my mother in this case, lose her grandchild. Grandchild doesn't even know who she is. And of course, the mother took it the hardest way, and my sister and I were close, but I could kibitz about it and say, well, maybe we should leave her here. She's happy. She's been educated by the nuns. They're very nice to her. She didn't lose any weight. She stayed the same. And, and she gave me a chmalia. It's a slap on the face. Don't you ever say that again. But this is how I felt. She's happy there. She's taken care of. And, the nuns like her. She loves the other kids. So that's the way. But after 3-4 months, she did recognize her mother, and she understood what's going on, and she came home with us. I think she was about 7.5, 8 years old. I'm 3 years older than her, so I must have been 10 and a half. So this is the story between the three of us. My mother, of course, was home first. She cleaned the house because they used our house for a horse stable. And they try to use the Jewish homes that the Jews left when they were taken away so that they could denigrate the Jewish people. So like our house was made into, as I said, horse stables, and so you can imagine what my mother had to go through to clean it. And the reason she was home first, because she worked for a local official not far from our house. It's a small little community, but it was the hub for that area in terms of having a department store and so forth and so on. So now we're all settled someplace. I'm at the farm with my grandparents, my sister's in the convent, my dad we lost, and my mother, as I told you, what she does. So 3-4 months later, on the farm, they came to take my dad away, my grandfather, and the German gentleman that came over who was a farmer, and he took over the farm and so forth. And also probably the hands that worked out there, so that he didn't have to go out and hire new people. And they were all Gentiles, they had children. And as a matter of fact, one of the plans was that I would stay there with Ivan, who was son of one of the farm hands, and he and I were the same age, we were buddies, and I could have stayed with them. But somebody would squeal on me and say, this is a Jewish person, and you never know. We had 7 people my grandfather had employed, and we didn't feel comfortable that they would keep quiet. It could have happened, but thank God it didn't if I stayed. But this is the kid, we were thinking of that, but my grandfather didn't think it was safe to leave me there. And as a side effect, he took me with him because he was worried that my mother would kill him if he left me there alone. But that's the way it goes. So we went, and we went to what they call a camp where they collect all the Jewish people, and they wait there till a train comes by, or we call them a cattle car, and they take you to we were going to Theresienstadt because we lived in the Czech Republic or the Czechoslovakia or Slovakia, whatever you want to call it. And they took all these people after spending 2-3 days in this holding pen. I don't know what else to call it. It wasn't a concentration camp, but it was a gathering place where they brought the Jews, and you sat outdoors and you had some food they gave you until the train comes. It could have been 2-3 days you wait, and then they fill up a cattle car and then they take you to Auschwitz. To Theresienstadt, because that was the closest camp to us. As a matter of fact, it was the only camp in Czechoslovakia. There wasn't more than one. And this was the one, Theresienstadt, which was designed as a model camp. In other words, this is where the Red Cross came to look and how they're doing and how they're treating the Jewish people. And of course, after they come and they'd see, then they wrote good reports. They gave it out to all the press services, and they would cover the whole world at how well the Germans treat the Jewish people. Of course, it was a hoax, and the Germans pulled the wool over everybody's eyes. Because when the International Red Cross leaves, they put out great reports, and it goes all over the country, all over the world, not just the country, and how well they treat the Jewish people. Well, of course, it was a sham, and just there's no way to correct it. So, in the camp, there's different. We all had to have jobs, and my grandmother worked in the kitchen. My grandfather got a job as a sweeper of the, what we call the big square, the square. And as a matter of fact, since I'm speaking with a young lady who's from Mandarin High School, they have a square like that, and this was the same kind but a little larger. And this is what they have: assemblies, gatherings, anything public that's going on. Even when someone was doing things, try to escape or whatever, this is where they would have hangings and so forth and so on. And everybody had to come out for this and watch. And why? Because they want to teach the people, look what happens to you if you don't do what we tell you. And this was their way of scaring everybody else, not to try to escape, not that you could. Incidentally, I might as well mention, they had a barbed wire fence all the way around, and if you wanted to escape, you really could, but you wouldn't go for it because you'd be electrocuted. So, and there are some people that would take advantage of that. That's a bad word, but you get the drift. If you touch these wires, 2 minutes, you're gone. So, not a lot, but several older people in their 80s, 90s, whatever, they just had enough and they couldn't handle it anymore, and they would choose that. But it's a very difficult decision, and a lot of people did not do that because it's against Jewish law to commit suicide. But, you know, after a while, if you just can't handle anymore, this is what you do. And there'd be 1 or 2, maybe 3 people, not every day, but it's mostly elderly people. They're dehydrated. It's not easy. As we all know, getting old is not for sissies. So this was the life in the camp. They also had another punishment where they tie you to these things that you tie horses to, and you stay outdoors without clothes on, and you freeze to death overnight. And that's even worse than being hung. I don't know, but that's what some of the things we discussed in the camp. Which would you choose if you had a choice? But the Germans were not, I just don't understand how humanity works. I could not do that. Most of us could not. But how do they kill so many people at will? How do you shoot somebody in the face? I mean, it's just difficult. Thank God when my grandfather was shot in the camp, he was sweeping the whatever we call that, the big lobby or whatever it's called, I forgot, the square where we met and everything. His job was to sweep the square, and there was 3-4 older people. That's the job they had. And this German just got a new gun, and he was showing off to 3-4 of his buddies, and just that boom, 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 he shot 3-4 people, 4 to be exact. And right in the back, the only good thing about it, thank God, they didn't see anybody shooting them. It came from the rear, they didn't know when. And of course, one bullet at that stage in their lives, these are older people, they just collapsed. It's very hard to describe this, but that was probably the worst thing an 8-year-old kid should see or can see, and that was very depressing for me. And I was a pretty tough kid, I was a bad kid, but that just took the wind out of it. And one of the things that I decided when I got there, saw how difficult life is going to be, I just accepted the fact that I'm going to die. I just don't know if it's today or tomorrow. So I kind of lived with that, and fear was not something I worried about because I knew I was going to die here. I just didn't know when. And I think that helped me to survive because I just didn't care. There was nothing I could lose. I had nothing to begin with. And, for food, we got one potato every day for dinner. And in the daytime for lunch, we got potato soup. The water that they boiled the potatoes in was our lunch. So this was the life and so forth. One of the benefits that I got is my grandmother, I mentioned, she worked in the kitchen, and every so often, or pretty much every day, she brought out 2 potatoes in her bra. And like I said to her once, kidding, I said, "Thank God you're small so you have room for these potatoes." And then sometimes she brought us salt, and we didn't think of that. My grandfather or my uncle or I, my uncle was a capo, by the way. And what a capo would be the best description. He's like a policeman. He doesn't have a gun, but he has a nightstick that the police use, and this was his job. And it's a scary job because you need to tell Jewish people what to do, and some of them, you come from the same city or whatever. So, make a long story short, it was a tough job because he'd have to ask people that would be on duty to pick up all the dead bodies at the end of the day and take them, put them in the ditch or whatever. And then they were at the end of the day to have a burning of these people. And the people that came out of the crematoriums, we didn't have that many in Theresienstadt, but we had enough for those people who didn't behave or again tried to escape and so forth. So that there were some, but most of them dehydration took them, or there's no medical care. They did have an infirmary, but if you went in there, you wouldn't come out because their medical facilities and doctor that was there, they didn't care. And the more people that died, the less they have to care. So I don't need to be brusque about this, but that's the reality of it. So that was our life in the camp. And thank God my grandmother brought the salt, which they took care of our teeth. And what I mean by that is we put water in a cup and we put salt in there and gargle, and then you do this with your gums, and thank God that helped us to save our teeth. Incidentally, most people that were in the camps, their teeth would deteriorate, especially if you're there 3-4 years. You have no toothpaste, no toothbrush, so and if you rub your gums with your hand or fingers, I know it's crude, but this saves you. And the salt is really good for us to gargle with the waters. And that basically is our life in the camp. And there were other incidences here and there, but it's too small to mention, and we have a limited time frame. So that's basically my story, one story, and everyone has a different story. If God forbid they were in a camp or what. There were camps that were worse than us. In our camp, they cleaned it up every time the Red Cross came, at least. We had food, not a lot, but we had the potato and we had this. And because my uncle was a capo, I did get some special privileges. On Fridays when the train came through to take people to various camps, mostly to Auschwitz or Birkenau, and we knew that was the end. So Fridays around noon, doesn't mean they'll come at noon, but it's about noon, they would come and pick up all the Jews that were in the square and that didn't have a job in this camp. They didn't want this camp to be overcrowded, so when the Red Cross came, they could see everybody's got a place to sleep and so forth. By the way, the bunks were a minimum of 3 beds up, and usually the kids went up to the 3rd floor, 3rd bed, and so forth. So there was 3 camps. I always preferred the top because I was a kid and I could climb up easier. Plus, if there's water coming down or someone doesn't do the right thing, then it could be worse. So we fought for the top. The only problem is that there's this much road. When you get up, if you aren't careful, you can bang your head. And maybe that's why I lost all my hair already. So these are the things that a kid remembers. And I was bit by a dog once, a German Shepherd, and I still have the mark. They bit me on the knee, and of course they killed the dog, and the dog already bit my knee. They had to pry him off. So just all these things, and there's nothing you could do. Who are you going to cry to? And life goes on. And basically, One incidences that happened in the camp, this one was typical. One time when the Red Cross came, the first time actually, they gave us Hershey bars to hold the kids that were on this side, and then the Germans were in the middle and the Red Cross was on the other side, so that we were not near the Red Cross. The Germans between us, and the camp was here. They also have soccer for the older gentlemen to play, so they could see how happy we are. And the kids were sitting over here, or standing, I should say, and we were like the entertainers, if you will. There's a lot of books written there. The cream of the crop from Prague and surrounding area were there. In other words, if you're an entertainer, a musician, a composer, these are the kind of people who were in this camp. The only reason we were there is because we lived in Czechoslovakia. So these people created, I guess, a sense of reality because they lived through the music. They didn't have the music, and of course the Germans are known to like music. So these people got special privileges. Also, we had plays. I never saw another butterfly or Wunderbar, and there was 55 plays put on by the young ladies. I guess most of them were ladies that played Wunderbar, and they had 55 performances and, over the period of years. And this is why the Germans created this, mostly to entertain the soldiers, entertain the inmates, and from time to time they respected people who were stars in Czechoslovakia, were movie actors and so forth. So these people, we were with the cream of the crop of the Jewish population in Czechoslovakia. And these people also had some privileges that most of us don't. As a matter of fact, in 2 weeks I'll be in Atlanta meeting with 2 girls who were in the same camp I was. And I have, I don't know what to say, butterflies that I'll meet them. I haven't seen them for 60 years or 70 years. And they're about 6, 7 years older than I am. So I was the baby in the camp, and maybe that's why I survived. Out of the 15,000 kids in our camp that went through Theresienstadt, about 150 survived. I was one of them, so I feel very lucky and blessed, even though what I went through was hard, but the good news is I'm here, and so I'm consider myself lucky and so forth. So I started about one of the incidences with the Hershey bars, when the Germans were there in the International Red Cross. They gave each of the kids, about 35, 40 of us, candy bars, and then when the Germans left, the Red Cross left, they would come and pick up the Hershey bars and took them back from us. Well, 3, 4 months later, they came again. They gave us the Hershey bars, and of course this time, the kids, fooled me once, but not twice. While the Red Cross was still there, we kind of looked at each other this way, and this one guy who was 10 years old, he went like this, that was meant for us. When we discussed this among the kids, but that's when we should start eating them. And of course, at the same time, we opened the candy bar, they were in our hands, and we ate them, and we held on to the wrappers so we can give it back to the Germans. Anyway, I need not tell you how happy we were. We had a Hershey bar, candy, sweet. There's no, we would have eaten them even if we knew we'd be shot. And of course, we ate them, and we held the wrappers so they could have them. And they came by and asked the kids, why did you do this? You could have got shot. What are you thinking? We were thinking about chocolate candy bar. We're kids. So they took the wrappers, and then they laughed. They didn't say out loud, but you could see they were, thank God none of us got shot. But they asked us, who told you to eat it? And I told them the guy next to me, and went down the line, both said. The last guy they asked to reach in, because there was 2 of them came to collect these, they said, why did you eat it? He said, because everybody else did. So these are the kind of things we've kind of felt we won a war. And of course, all we got is a candy bar, but it was the best thing we did. And that's basically some of the things that went on at the camp and so forth. And of course, our guys played soccer, which was a big thing there. And this is just how life was in one camp, one person's story, and there's a story for everybody else. And all of us were different. We all had different people and so forth. So in May of 1945, I think it was May 7th, I'm not exactly sure, and the Russians came to liberate us, not the Americans and the Russians. And the Russians, they shoot first and ask questions later. The Americans are just the opposite. They ask questions first and then they shoot. And again, this is my child's, a kid's interpretation of how, I mean, the Americans were much nicer to the population, to the Jews, and they were much more light than the Russians. The Russians were a very crude kind of people, and they weren't dressed properly. They didn't have warm clothes. And one of the things that came out of that they lost 21 million Russian soldiers and Russians in World War II. They lost a lot of military personnel. I mean, the most of any country. And this is because they didn't have the right clothing. They come from Siberia, and just the way it is. And they had a tendency to carry a rifle in their right hand, and in their left hand they carried a bottle of vodka, or slivovichka they called it. And you know, they're out there in the cold weather, and every time you take a sip of the liquor, you know, it dehydrates you. It's worse and worse. And so some of the things they did not help them to live longer. And that's a tragedy of the Russian soldiers. But thank God they cleared us and took us out and let us go the minute they got in. After all the Germans were killed, they had no facilities to take soldiers and feed them, have barracks for them. So to them, the easiest thing was to eliminate them. And so the Jewish population went into their bungalows or wherever they stayed in our homes, so to speak, on mattresses on the floor if we were lucky. Otherwise, you slept on the floor, and you might have had a pillow, you might have had a mattress, but that's nothing short. And the other thing that I remember is going to the restroom, the women and the men. The place they facilitate, the facilities they gave us were so bad odor or smelling that a lot of us went outside into the bush or whatever behind the bunk, and we just did everything we had to there, and using leaves and things like that. It was cleaner and more sanitary than going into these facilities where they had some running water, but it was a long, like when horses drink water, it was like a trout along the way. And I, for one, prefer the outside than going into these smelly places. And one of the kids at some of the high schools that I visit, try to tell them the story. As for what did the girls do, I says, I don't know, they wouldn't let me watch. But these are the kind of things you have to laugh about, and a lot of people went indoors, they didn't mind this, and that's fine. They did what they wanted to do, which is fine. The other thing I remember that the rabbi here in Jacksonville asked me when I had my Hebrew school lessons, and I said, all I did, we learned how to clap. Why clap? Because the older people, they were religious, wanted to say the prayers on weekends, sometimes at night, depending on what holiday it is. And the kids, they had about 10, 15 kids that would stand around the bungalows or I guess you can call them barracks. And by the way, this was a military camp that we had. Theresienstadt was built in the 18th century, real thick walls, and it was a military base for the Czech army. And they converted that into a model camp, if you will. And there was a moat around it, so you couldn't escape. And if you did escape, there's 6, 7 towers with German soldiers. They had machine guns, and they could kill at will whoever they wanted to kill. This is just the way life is. You never know when a bullet would come your way. And again, one of the major problems they had was, how do you kill so many people, 6 million? It's very difficult. In Auschwitz, if you put 500 people in one of the showers, you would call it, but that's for the gas, you go in there, about 500 people at one time, because it's a big problem to kill 500 people. Just think about it. So they would go in there without their clothes, and they'd say, we're going to take a shower, and obviously they're naked, so they must have thought something's going on, and sure enough, they'd go in there, something would come out of the shower heads, but it wasn't water. And 2 minutes later, they were all dead, and then they had to get some Jewish people, and that's what the capos did, took care of that to get people to take these bodies and take them outside. They had ditches. They would put a match to it. These people were dead already, but they had to get rid of the bones and so forth. And just the odor, you could tell people were being burned. When you burn or skin, even though you're dead, it's just the odor is so bad. So we knew when something like that was going on, because there's no way the Germans could, I don't know, hide the smell of these kind of things. And these are the basic things that I give you the highlights. I can't remember everything as I was a child from age 7 to 10. And I guess I was there about 30 months or so. Not 3 years, but 30 months. And that's basically the story that I have. And I'll end it there. And thank you for listening to this stuff.
Can you mention about your uncle and what you taught him about God?
And one of the things, speaking of God, at some point after I was there about 6 months, I said to my uncle, who's Hugo, and he's been, I guess, 25, 26, strong, big guy. And I said to him, I says, how could God let this kind of thing happen and just kill so many people? And these people have no respect for human life. I mean, I just couldn't wrap my mind around this. And he said, Roby, that was my name in Czechoslovakia, and his name is Hugo, H-U-G-O. You don't understand. God didn't do this. We, people, did it to ourselves. No one went to Germany and said, you guys got to get together and do this. And of course, I didn't feel the same towards God after that. I just felt that someplace along the way, God should have stopped this, not allow it. Well, I was a young kid. I don't know any better. And when he told me this, I lost all my respect for God. And I'm ashamed to tell you that eventually, after the war, I realized some of this stuff. And I talked to other people, but I was a kid. No one gave me the right time of day because they know better. I'm just a child. But this is my concern that I got. And if I got that feeling, there must be many people. But thank God, after the war, because I survived, I guess I said, well, maybe it was us. Who knows? But right now, I do believe in God, and I hope that I never feel that again, that I don't respect or feel that there is a God looking out for all of us. Thank you.